We're delighted to have Loma Pendergraft, one of Seattle's local crow experts, as our speaker tonight. Loma grew up in Oklahoma, where one of his experiences important to his later course was his work as a wildlife rehabber for a local veterinarian. Loma graduated from Oklahoma State University, where he developed an interest in animal behavior, applying that curiosity to subjects, quote unquote, as varied as scissor-tail flycatchers, European honeybees, and prairie voles. In his next chapter, Loma devoted himself to teaching as a science teacher in the Tulsa, Oklahoma schools for several years. Go science teachers. And next, what better than to bring Loma's own words to you? I've been interested in crows and all corvids most of my life, so I was naturally drawn to John Marzluff's research. I knew I wanted to work in academia, so the Marzluff Lab was clearly my first choice when I started applying to graduate school. Here at UW, he received his master's working on different vocalizations that American crows give around food. In 2021, Loma completed his doctorate here at UW for work centered around food, brain activity, and problem solving in crows. His thesis was titled Thought for Food. As you've seen in the slides, Loma is a well-published author already and has his work featured in Audubon Magazine, National Geo, and Bill Nye Saves the World, as well as our local news and public radio. Currently works as an instructor of animal behavior and wildlife science at UW. Welcome, Loma.
Thanks, Jody. Should I just take over the screen sharing?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Just one moment. Share sound, just screen.
Perfect.
You all set? Does it all look
Yes, perfect.
good? All right, fantastic. I mean, thank you so much for inviting me. I've given this talk several times, and yeah, I guess I'm gonna have to modify it slightly to fit my audience, and a big reason for that is my audience typically doesn't know all that much about birds, and so what I usually do is I start by leading into this topic by asking, what's the difference between a crow and a raven? But I'm talking to the WOS. Of course, you all know the difference between a crow and a raven. Crows are smaller, ravens are bigger, they sound different. They even have like the difference in the feather tail arrangement or the size of the beak. So I'm just gonna kind of breeze through this section and get to like the more advanced stuff. Yeah, crows sound like that, ravens sound like this. And crows and ravens, they have that special place in our cultural zeitgeist. And part of the reason for that is that we're drawn to them because people will look out their window and they'll see crows just doing the strangest things, the funniest behaviors. And we do find them very funny. It's part of the reason why people find them so interesting. So in this video I'm gonna play, it shows a hooded crow, and well, I'll just let the video show you. So this bird has found itself a toy. It looks like the lid of a yogurt container or something. And the cool thing is that after it slides down the side, it flies it back up to the top and actually tries to reuse it. It's not having much success now because it's not on snow. It has to reposition. Put it on a slip surface, stand on it, give it a few pecks, and down it goes. So this is an example of play behavior. And, lots of animals play. We can think of plenty of examples of puppies playing, kittens playing, lots of young animals play. But this crow over here, that's not a young crow, that's an adult. Now, here's another example, also a hooded crow. It's found itself a toy in the form of a teeter-totter or a seesaw. So this is curious for scientists. We normally assume that play behavior is practice for adulthood, which sort of makes sense. If we watch kittens play, they like to chase small things that are moving along the ground. They pounce on stuff. They're practicing their prey drive. Same thing with puppies. You see them like wrestling with one another or like playing tug of war, and that's because those are all important skills that they're going to need as dogs or as wolves. And we see all sorts of play behavior in crows, things like they'll play with objects. So they'll manipulate some sort of like non-food thing for seemingly no reason. Crows will play cash. That's where they'll take an inedible object like a rock or a toy or something. They'll go and cache it somewhere. We've seen them even play at flight. So they'll do all these elaborate acrobatic displays in the air. But almost all the time that we see this, they're adult crows. So that kind of like invalidates the whole idea that these animals are playing because they're practicing they're practicing skills they're going to need as adults. So why do this? Why go through all this trouble and play around? I mean, as humans, we would say, well, animals play because it's fun, and that is a good explanation, but that is what scientists would call a proximate level explanation. It's like the very nitty gritty, like, why do we eat? Because we're hungry, very basic level. At a broader scale, why would they play? And so scientists came up with a couple of different hypotheses to try to explain this behavior. Here are some of the more popular ones. Maybe they are playing because it's a way for them to learn important skills. And by practicing those skills in the form of play, they can be better suited to solve problems in their environment. Or maybe it's a way to boost their creativity or boost their intelligence. Well, scientists being scientists, several researchers have gone out and tried to test these hypotheses. They would design studies where they would, prevent animals from playing. Like animals in group A, they were prevented from playing. Animals in group B, they were encouraged to play. And then they would have both animals from both groups try out different cognitive tasks, and come to find out there's really no difference in the ability to solve tasks or be creative from the two groups that play or don't play. So they're compelling ideas, but they're not supported by evidence. So we now think that play behavior is a great mechanism for crows and other animals like chimps, dolphins, elephants, all other intelligent animals, to explore boundaries, test the limits of their environment, test the boundaries of their friendships or their associations with cohorts, however you want to call it, and also to test possibilities. Sometimes we'll see crows, for example, they'll go annoy larger predators by like going behind them and yanking on their tail. And of course, the predator will spin around and try to grab them. The bird's not ready to jump back. And that's kind of a way for the crow to sort of, learn more about that predator. How fast do they react? How aware are they of their surroundings? That's a useful skill to know. And it's a way to build social bonds with others. Crows are social animals. It's helpful to be able to build coalitions between individuals. And finally, scientists think that play behavior doesn't cause intelligence. Play behavior is a byproduct of intelligence. All those animals I mentioned earlier, besides crows, animals that play as adults, so like primates like monkeys and apes, elephants, dolphins and whales, parrots, these are all very intelligent animals. And the play seems to be like a way to outwardly express all this curiosity and creativity they have that happens as a result of their intelligence. And I see that people are posting in the chat. I'm going to take a quick moment and go through here. Yeah, so maybe play releases endorphins, so it's a feedback loop. Yeah, that's a great example of a approximate level explanation. Play does release endorphins, and we think that it feels good and that motivates us to play some more. An ultimate level explanation would be that it's just a byproduct. So in the same vein as we eat because we're hungry, we've got cortisol and other hormones in our blood that dictate whether we're hungry, but we also eat because we need those nutrients to power our metabolism. So just different levels of explanation for the same thing. Yeah, cool stuff. So people pay attention to crows. They're charismatic for many number of reasons. We find them funny, but also, we find them kind of strange and mysterious. So this is a video that takes place at the University of Washington's campus over in Bothell, right around dusk. I'll just go ahead and play it. Ooh, that's kind of spooky. Halloween's a couple of days past, but perfect Halloween material. What's going on here? Why are all these birds flying to one spot every night? And it is many birds. In fact, if you go out to the roost, in fact, now's the season, right around dusk, you'll see at its height, I think it attracted like 16,000 crows that flew there every single night to sleep. I've been talking with Doug Wacker. He's a researcher over at UW-Bothell who also studies crows, and he's informed me that those numbers are starting to decrease. Crows are starting to shift away from that roost and go to a different roost. But all the same, this is a good example of what we would call a communal roost. So crows are flying several miles, up to a dozen miles in the evenings and in the mornings, because they fly there from their territory to sleep every night, and then in the morning they fly back to their territory to spend all day at the territory. So, what's going on here? Why would they gather in these huge numbers and travel so far to sleep every night? Well, one reason why they would do this is that it's safe. If you're a crow and you're going to be hanging out during the night when you're vulnerable, you're vulnerable to predators. An owl could swoop in and grab you before you have a chance to react. So if you're one crow amidst 15, 16,000 crows, the odds of you being taken by an owl at any given night are pretty slim. So you're diluting your risk. Much better odds being one bird amidst 15,000 than say one bird in 20. The difference is like a 5% chance of being grabbed versus a 0.001% chance of being grabbed. And those are good odds. And even if you set aside just the fact that you're one bird amidst several thousand, but you also have several thousand eyes that are scanning the darkness looking for danger. One bird by themselves, they're gonna have to spend part of their time asleep, part of their time awake. They do have that unihemispherical sleep, so they rest half their brain at a time. But still, it can only look in one direction at a time. But if you have 15 or 16,000 pairs of eyes that are constantly looking for danger, odds are if you have a raccoon that trundles along looking for a snack, somebody is going to see them and raise the alarm. That particular location in Bothell, they'd go there every night instead of somewhere else because it's a really good location. You've got a group of trees that provide shelter from the wind, but on all the sides of the trees, they have other special things that make the area very enticing. The campus half of the roost, the part of the roost that faces campus, it's right next to a bunch of athletic fields. So soccer field, football field, you have those really big stadium lights that flood the area so that people can, play soccer or play football. And that keeps the area lit up, which is good for a crow because crows can't see very well at night. Their night vision's roughly comparable to our own. And for a human, we can get around at night if the moon's out. You can kind of see where you're going. But if you make a mistake, you might trip and fall over, and you might hurt yourself, but you'll be okay. But imagine that you're a crow, and something starts climbing up the tree that you're in, and you have to take off in order to stay alive. But if you can't see where you're going, that's a very frightening and stressful experience because if they can't see where they're going when they're flying, they can crash into something and break a wing. And a crow with a broken wing, that's a death sentence. So this athletic field on one side and also the highway exchange on the other side, where you have those highway lights the drivers can see, that floods the area with a lot of ambient light, which means that if a crow has to take off, they can usually see where they're going and find a safe place to land. These roosts also offer great social benefits. A young crow that's looking to get established, find a mate, can have plenty of potential mates to choose from at a large roost like that. It's almost like a combination of a singles bar and information exchange. And in that video, you may have noticed it was a very loud video. All the crows were calling and making a lot of noise, which suggests that they're exchanging information of some kind. Now, we're not entirely sure what information is being exchanged at the roost. I know that's something that Doug Wacker is looking into, but there's so much about crow vocalizations, different crow calls that they give that we don't know. But we do know some things. And one of the things that scientists have done is they've broadly sorted crow vocalizations into two different categories. There are cause, and then there's non-cause. Scientists are great at naming things. Cause, you can probably, what that sounds like. Here's a good example of a structured cause. So cause are further separated into structured cause and unstructured cause. So here's an example of a structured cause. So the crow gives a series of calls and then waits. Then calls again, waits, listens, and then calls again. So we tend to see structured cause in more formalized settings. You have crows that are giving territorial calls back and forth to one another. So one will call, the other one will listen, then this will be quiet, and this one will call while this listens, and they'll kind of go back and forth. On the other hand, we can also have what we would call unstructured cause, which sound like this. So, there's no structure to this. The bird is just screaming. And these particular caws are what we would call scold caws. They're the vocalizations that a crow gives whenever it sees something dangerous. It's trying to rally other crows to fly to the area so they can chase it off. Now, of course, there are plenty of other sounds that crows make. And, beyond being fairly quiet, so, a caw we think is meant to be broadcast over a large area. It's meant to talk to other crows, even crows outside of view. But these other sounds that crows make, they're quiet. And we think that because they're so quiet, they're meant to only be given to a crow that's in the close vicinity, like a mate, for example. Here's one such example. This is a rattle call. It sort of sounds like the Predator from that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. We have no idea what that call means. We can't even agree on who's giving the call. There is a research paper published in the 70s where the scientists pointed out that they only ever observed the rattle call being given by males. And they speculated that it was like a courtship call, the male's trying to court a female. But then there's another paper that was published in 2008 where the author countered and said, no, I only ever saw female crows give that call. And it was only under the context of there was just a fight and now they're trying to calm things down. So we really don't know what it means. We know that crows give it, but beyond that, we have no idea. Here's another example of a non-caw sound that they make. It's called a growl. It's sort of like the rattle. You still have that same quality. But growls, I tend to see whenever the crow is dive bombing something, they're flying low or something, they'll kind of they'll give that call. And so my assumption is it's kind of like a, hey, back off sort of thing, or, go away, I'm chasing you. And this last one, scientists call a wow wow note. And I'm going to play it, but it's going to be really quiet. So you have to listen carefully. It's going to sound like the crow in a very soft voice is saying, hello, hello. So take a listen. I recorded that sound in my aviary, and I have no idea what it means. In fact, scientists don't know what most of these vocalizations mean. We know that most unstructured caws are scolds, but that's about it. It's really hard to parse all the different crow vocalizations that they give. But that is something that I set out to do whenever I first started as a graduate student here at UW. I used to feed the crows on campus, and I noticed that whenever I'd throw peanuts out to them, they would always call as they flew in. Here's an example. And that was kind of curious because, if I'm throwing food on the ground and they're calling as they fly in, it's almost like they're trying to attract more crows to that area. But if they attract more crows to the area, that means they've got more competition. There's fewer peanuts for themselves because everyone's trying to grab a bit. So I was curious about this. And so for my master's project, I designed an experiment to try to, parse out what's going on here. So what I would do is I went all across Seattle. I would find crows, and I would record all the sounds and vocalizations they made, before I did anything. What's their default state? Then I would toss out some peanuts. They'd see that and get very excited. They'd all fly in. They'd all start squabbling over the food. And I would continue to record all the sounds they gave, and then I'd keep doing that for the 5 minutes or for 5 minutes after they finished eating all the food, see them as they go back to their, normal state. And what I noticed was that whenever, before I started feeding them, where I first showed up and they were still just kind of doing their own thing, they tended to give these medium structured caws. And so let me kind of explain what this graph is. So here we go. This is a spectrogram. There we go. And it's just a way to sort of visualize what a sound is going to sound like. So we have time right here on the x-axis, and this is just frequency. And these dark areas just mean that that sound has a lot of sound energy right at these various pitches. So basically, whenever I play this sound effect, you're going to hear 4 long bursts. So ha, 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 ha. There'll be a pause with some background sounds, and there'll be 4 more sounds. Each of them is going to be about half a second long. So let's go ahead and just do that. And yeah, they tended to give these, oops, hang on, let me turn this off. They tended to give these calls before I fed them. And then whenever I would throw food out, their calls tended to shift. They tended to stay structured, but they became much shorter in duration. So here's an example of that. There's going to be 3 short calls, a pause, 6 more short calls, followed by another pause, followed by 5 short calls. Okay, so fairly simple, right? These are food calls and these are something else. Mystery over, right? Well, not quite. These calls are associated with food or no food, but what do they really mean? So in order to find out what purpose these calls serve, what the crows are actually communicating, I had to do what's called a playback experiment. So that's when scientists put out a loudspeaker and they broadcast a signal or a sound back to the animal. And they record the animal's behavior. They watch how the animal's behavior changes as they listen to and react to the sound. And so I would take a loudspeaker out, I'd hide it in a tree or a bush so that, from the listening crow's point of view, there's a crow hiding in that bush. And I'd play these sounds back to them. I'd see what they do. So I recorded things like, how many crows are there in the area? Are these sounds, drawing crows in, or are they repelling them? I recorded, what sounds or what calls did the listening crow get in response? They're trying to, they hear a signal, they're trying to signal back. I recorded just how close did the listening crows get to the speaker. The crows, they're smart, but they never really recognize that a speaker is a source of the sounds. They always assume that there's just another crow hiding somewhere out of range or out of view. And so if you get close, then the assumption is that they're trying to find the caller. He's in those bushes. I'm going to find him. I looked at feather posturing. So that's where they fluff out the feathers around their throat, the back of their back and their chest, and they sort of walk around with really exaggerated, like strutting motion. That's a dominance display. That tells me that the listening crows are trying to intimidate other crows in their environment, ostensibly the crow that's giving those calls. And finally, I also looked for wingtail flicking. That's the crow sort of flips its wings or its tail feathers open and shut without actually flying or taking off. And that's a sign of agitation. The crow is upset about something. And what I was able to determine was that these medium calls, the ha, 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 those are territorial calls. If you play these calls to a crow when the crow is on its territory, it'll get really offended. It'll puff out. It'll start trying to find the speaker. It'll start giving its own territorial calls. Whereas if you play them to crows that are outside of their territory, they'll either ignore it if it's a large communal area, or they'll fly away really fast because they're trespassing and they assume that the caller is about to fly out and kick them out. However, these short structured calls, I have no idea what they mean. The crows gave them around a food source, and yet whenever I played it to them, they tended to ignore them. And in fact, I even hid food close to the speaker, thinking that maybe if they're trying to recruit other crows to the food source, they'll be more likely to find the food. It made no difference. The crows were not any more likely to find the food if I played these short calls. But they were more likely to discover the food if I play these medium structured calls, which sort of tells me why the crows avoided giving these calls whenever I actually threw food on the ground. Basically, what would happen is I would hide the food, I'd put the speaker out, I'd play the calls, and the crows would get really upset. They'd fly up looking for a fight, like, okay, who's here? Oh, hey, peanuts. And then they'd ignore the calls, fly down, they eat their meal. And so my interpretation is that the crows try to avoid giving territorial calls around food because they will attract their rivals. Their neighbors are not their friends, they're rivals, and so you want to try and keep them away. My guess is that these short calls maybe are a way to recruit specific individuals, like, hey, my mate needs to come over here, but because I have no way of specifically identifying individual crows. There's no way to pair them with the correct crow. So I only ever played these sounds at the location where I recorded them, but there's no way to guarantee that the listening crows were the same crows I originally recorded them from. And we also have strong circumstantial evidence that crows can recognize the voice of other crows and be able to identify them based strictly on their voice, the same way that we can. So, the jury's still out on why they give these calls. I don't have any strong evidence that supports any conclusion. So I was able to solve one mystery, but there's still plenty of others. Crow vocalizations are really hard to parse and understand. Yeah, so crows can be really mysterious. They can do things that we find kind of strange, but they can also do things that we find kind of scary or even disturbing. This is a photo taken by one of my old colleagues. Her name is Dr. Kaylee Swift. She also studied crows. And she studied this particular behavior, which is known as a crow funeral. Now, what's exactly going on with a crow funeral? The name kind of evokes, human emotions, like they're grieving or they're have like a ritual sort of thing. Well, in order to really explain what a crow funeral is, I have to first explain a different behavior that crows do. So here's a video that you may have actually seen since y'all are all birders. But we have a bald eagle just hanging out. and then the crows find it. The crows find the bald eagle and they just lose their collective minds and they all start flying around and dive bombing it. And so this is an example of what we would call mobbing. So mobbing is an anti-predator strategy that crows use to try to keep themselves safe from dangerous animals. So what happens is whenever a crow finds a predator or something dangerous like a bald eagle or a red-tailed hawk or a cat or a raccoon, they'll give those scolds, those unstructured caws, the those calls. Other crows that hear it will all fly in. If they find the predator and agree, yes, that is a predator, they will join in. And collectively, all those crows will start harassing the threat. But you saw in that video, the crows were treating that bald eagle as the danger that it truly was. But the bald eagle was just sort of mildly annoyed at them. For the crows, the bald eagle was like this mortal threat, but to the bald eagle, this is just Tuesday. This happens every day. And mobbing can be dangerous to crows. I've seen on one occasion a crow get a little too close to I think it was a Cooper's hawk that was flying along. The Cooper's hawk flipped around and grabbed the crow out of the air. The crow is a little bit too big for the Cooper's hawk to fully take down and tackle, but it definitely inflicted some serious injuries on the crow whenever it grabbed it. So probably ended up killing it. So the whole point of mobbing is, the main goal is to try to, or the best case scenario is they chase the predator away, but that doesn't usually happen. These predators get mobbed by crows all the time, and so a more reasonable goal of the mob is to spread awareness. All these predators, eagles, hawks, owls, the only way that they're able to hunt a crow is if they're able to take the crow by surprise. The crow is just on the ground foraging, doing its own thing. All of a sudden, bam, out of nowhere, a hawk has flown in and grabbed it. But if all the birds in the area are screaming, hawk, 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 the hawk's not going to be able to hunt. Everyone in the area knows it's there. And even if it wanted to hunt, we have crows flying overhead, kind of redirecting its attention, keeping it distracted, so that makes it really hard to hunt. And in most cases, a hawk that's being consistently mobbed by crows will leave the area because it's not going to be able to hunt there. The only times that you're going to see a predator stick around whenever crows are mobbing it is whenever it's not interested in hunting in the first place. It's just busy preening or trying to sleep or something to that effect. Now, to get back to that earlier photo of the crow funerals, well, crows will also mob dead crows. Here's a video of that. So I got this footage over at Madison Park. There's a dead crow that we've taxidermied to look like it's freshly dead. It's splayed on the ground like that. And whenever the crows find it, they basically lose their minds. They start screaming. They start alarm calling. Other crows will fly in. They'll join, and they'll basically mob a dead body. So very interesting behavior because the dead crow isn't in and of itself a threat to these crows. So why do this? My colleague Kaylee Swift, this is another one of her photos, through her research figured out that crows are mobbing these bodies because they're trying to learn about new sources of danger in their environment. Crows have fantastic annual survivorship. I think something like 90% of individuals that are adults survive to the next year. The only exception to that rule are the young crows. Young crows, they're kind of dumb and naive, and they don't really know to avoid certain dangers. And so lots of young crows don't make it through their first year. But once they're adults, they're very good at staying alive. So if something is able to kill a crow, the survivors want to know about it. They are constantly looking through the area, looking for, what could have killed this crow so that I can avoid it in the future. So there may be, an element of like emotion to this, grief, sadness, but we haven't figured out a way to test that in an ethical way. But what we have been able to figure out is that they are also, or are definitely using these funerals as a means to learn about danger. So like if they see like a dog or something next to the dead body, they're going to assume the dog killed it, and they will memorize that dog's features and treat that dog as an enemy in the future. So crows are good at learning things, learning about danger, but also learning how to solve tasks. So this is an example of some of my own research. In this task, I've given the birds a job. I've got the perch they can perch on. They've got a long string, and hanging at the end of the string is a chicken nugget. Crows love chicken nuggets. And this is a pretty common task that scientists give to birds, not just crows. It's a way to look at problem-solving ability. And whenever I first capture the crows from the wild and bring them into captivity, I will give them this task, and I'll see how they solve it. And the first time they encounter it, they tend to do one of two things. And let's see, Sky Blue here is going to demonstrate one of those methods. Now, before I play the video, I should point out that the camera is on the floor of the aviary. It's looking upwards at an angle. So that kind of explains the weird angle. Like this red thing right here, that's the water bowl. This is Sky Blue, and here's the food, the string, and the perch. Let's see what Sky Blue does. Well, that was easy. You just fly up there and you did it. The problem that Sky Blue now has is that she only has a portion of the chicken nugget. The rest of it's still tied to the string, and now it's swinging back and forth like a pendulum. So she's going to have to wait for it to stop swinging before she can fly up and grab the rest of it. And also, Sky Blue was one of our smaller birds, so it was fairly simple for her to hover in place. But the bigger birds, they're heavy. It takes a lot of energy to hover in place. So the other method that these birds will do in order to retrieve the food is, if you have the perch, they'll fly up, they'll land on the perch, and they'll go up to where the string is, and they'll just start, pecking and tearing and banging on the string until eventually the string breaks. The food falls to the floor, they fly down, they eat it. Also a fairly simple method. It's favored by larger individuals. But after a while, these birds learn a better technique to retrieve this food. And Dark Blue is going to demonstrate that technique. So he starts by reaching down and pulling up the string, but then he steps on the string so that whenever he lets go, it doesn't fall back down. And while holding onto it, he reaches down, pulls up some more, steps on the string, and by repeating this action, he's able to reel the food to within easy reach. He's not the entire thing, and he's not wasted any energy or effort in a strategy that doesn't give him the entire food all at once. Now, Dark Blue had to learn this method. It took him about 2 weeks to figure this out. And in fact, only 2 birds out of my sample size of, I think, about 30 some crows were able to do this from the get-go. They started out by doing that. The rest of them had to learn it. But they are capable of something known as insight. Insight's not the same as learning. With learning, it oftentimes involved a lot of trial and error, or you have to watch someone else do it and kind of learn by observation. But with insight, that's when the animal considers a task, seemingly thinks about it, and then all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, comes up with, spontaneously arrives at a solution with minimal trial and error. And this video, I love playing this video because it's a great example of insight, and there's a moment when everyone all of a sudden understands what's about to happen. But I need to provide a little bit of context first. So this video is going to showcase a New Caledonian crow. New Caledonian crows come from, the island of New Caledonia, which is a small island in the Pacific Ocean. And New Caledonia is unusual because there are no woodpeckers on that island. So you have like this entire wealth of unexploited food in the form of like beetle larvae and grubs that are hiding just out of reach inside like wood crevices and stuff. And the crows that live there have figured out that they can use tools to retrieve these beetles and grubs. They've got all sorts of different tools for the various tasks. Some birds will get like cactus spines and they'll kind of like spear the grubs out. Some of them have figured out they can use the edge of a pandanus leaf. And so pandanus leaves have an edge to them, like a serrated saw blade. And these birds will actually peel the edge off the leaf, so they have a long, thin thing that's got a serrated edge to it, and they can use that serrated edge to kind of grip and pull insects out of tree trunks and crevices and stuff. So they're already primed to use tools. They're very good at it. American crows are not nearly as good at using tools. Now, for this task that I'm about to show you, the researchers had two crows. Uh, uh, a male, his name was Abel, and his mate, a female named Betty. And they gave these crows a task. You'll be able to see it later whenever the video zooms in, but it's a transparent tube, and inside the tube is a little basket with food inside. And they gave these birds two tools to try to solve this task. They gave them a straight piece of wire and a hooked piece of wire. The idea being that they have to select the correct tool for the task. Well, unfortunately for Betty, her mate, Abel, grabbed the hooked piece of wire and flew off of it, stole it. So the only thing she had left to work with was the straight piece of wire. So let's see what Betty does with it. She starts by trying to scrape the basket along the inside. That doesn't work. So she shifts gears and tries stabbing the basket, but that doesn't work either. So she changes tactics. She takes the wire, she jams it into the tape on the outside of the tube, pulls it around, and pops it out. And with her new hooked wire, she's able to retrieve the basket with food inside. She was trained to use tools to retrieve the basket, but turning a straight piece of wire into a hook, that was insight. So, pretty amazing stuff. I mentioned before, or it was mentioned before, that I got my PhD working for John Marzluff. And, he was responsible for one study that kind of made our lab famous locally, but also kind of nationally. And that was with his facial recognition study. So whenever John first started working for the UW, he started studying crows, and he began an experiment. I forget what the details were. I think he was mapping out territories, but that's not really the point. The point was, in order to do this experiment, he went out all across Seattle and he captured a bunch of crows. And then he attached little lead bands, kind of like little ankle monitors. That's just standard practice with bird research. It's just a way to keep track of individuals, because I don't know about you, but all crows look the same to me. But he ran into a problem. Whenever he went back out to those sites to check on the crows would start screaming at him, and they start scolding him. In fact, they would treat him the same way they would any dangerous predator. And so that got him curious. He asked himself, are they mobbing people because a person captured them and traumatized them, or are they mobbing me because I wronged them? So he devised an experiment to try to figure out what's going on. The idea was that he would wear a mask, and while wearing that mask, he would capture a bunch of crows. And crows, of course, don't like being captured. They find it very traumatizing. And he would test to see whether or not they recognized the mask anytime he went back out after capturing them. So he went and he found a caveman mask from a Halloween store, and he wore it around campus. The crows didn't care. He was just one person amidst a crowd. He also, walked around campus without a mask, so his default face. Again, the crows didn't care, and so he was mostly set up, ready to go. But then he realized, this thing doesn't actually look all that much like a person. It's a very grotesque, exaggerated version of a person. So, maybe they won't recognize this face specifically. Maybe they'll just cue in on the fact that I'm wearing a piece of rubber. So he needed to buy a second mask that he could use as a control mask. He would never wear it while he captured the crows. And it needed to somewhat resemble the caveman mask. So he used Dick Cheney. He wore the caveman mask and the Cheney mask and no mask all around campus. The crows didn't care. So one day, while wearing the caveman mask, he captured, I think, 3 or 4 different groups of crows across campus. And crows are wily. It's really hard to catch them. Mist nets tend to be too fragile. They'll burst out of that. So in order to catch crows, we have to use something called a net launcher. And net launchers work by using a rifle cartridge or rifle blank to propel some metal pistons out, and those pistons drag a net out behind it. And so it happens very fast, and it's very loud. It sounds like a gunshot going off. Here's a video.
3, 2, 1.
So imagine that you're a crow. You and your buddies are gathered around a pile of bread. You're happily gorging yourself. Someone left bread on campus. You're having a great time. And all of a sudden, bang! Out of nowhere, a net pins you to the ground. You're struggling. You can't get free. All of your peers who are lucky enough to escape are all flying around screaming, danger, danger, danger. When this guy runs out, pulls you out from under the net, holds you down, attaches little bracelets to your leg, but then somehow, miraculously, you're able to escape. Lucky you, right? If crows can recognize people, John gave them every single reason in the world to remember this person. And it turns out they do. Anytime John wore the caveman mask on campus, the crows on campus would just lose their minds. They would scream at him, they'd dive bomb him, they'd attract other crows to start chasing him. Absolute pandemonium. And they only did that for the caveman mask. They completely ignored Cheney and his face without the mask on. Now that experiment took place, I think 18 years ago. And John has since retired, but he's still coming to campus every year or so to test it out. And it seems like after about 18 to 20 years, the crows have finally forgotten the caveman, but it took a long time. And that mobbing also served to recruit other crows who had never witnessed, the caveman incident, but they joined in the mob. And through the mob, they learned that this person's dangerous. So social learning in the mob. So these crows are outwardly treating these masks as different, these different faces as different, but what's going on inside their head as they are exposed to these different stimuli? What are they thinking whenever they see different people? Well, the last set of experiments that we did in this lab before John retired and before I graduated involved conducting what are called PET scans on the crows. And they're a mechanism to kind of look at brain activity in these birds. And the way that a PET scan works is that first you inject the subject with a radio tracer. It's just a radioactive isotope that's absorbed metabolically by the body. So if I was to inject myself with this radio tracer and then I spent 10 minutes, running around, it would accumulate in whatever part of my body is consuming the most energy. So if I ran around, it would go into my lungs, my heart, and in my leg muscles. But these crows weren't doing that. We put them in a cage and we exposed them to a stimulus. And all they had to do is just sit there, look at the stimulus, and think about the stimulus. Their different parts of their brain are working harder than others depending on what part of the brain they're using. And because they're working harder, they're absorbing more of that radio tracer. And then once it's fixed in place, we can anesthetize the birds so that they're sleeping. We can strap them down so that they are held still and they're still asleep, so they're not stressed out and panicking. And then we can scan their brain, see where where are we detecting positron emissions from the radio tracer? And we can end up with something like this. So this is a combination of a PET and a CT image. So the colored part is from the PET scan. So like those little red splotches are parts of the brain where we're detecting the vast majority of the positrons. Those lighter colors are, we detected some positrons, but not as much. The black and white translucent bit are CT or X-ray scans. And I really like this image because it shows you, one, how big the crow's brain is, but two, how big their eyes are. When we think of crows, we can only really see, this tiny little outer ring, but inside their head, they've got surprisingly big eyeballs. So really good vision. So anyways, to do this experiment, we first had to gather up a bunch of crows. So here's a video of me capturing some crows. This is over at Bothell while they're still doing construction along Main Street. So we got a bunch of crows. We have a trash can. They love trash cans, but hidden inside that trash can is a net launcher.
Wait for the right moment. Can't be any birds flying around.
I have to wait for the right moment. But then...
Great, great, great. We got him.
So we captured a bunch of crows, and while we were, extracting them from the net, weighing them and putting them into the cat carrier to get them back to the aviary, we were wearing a special mask. Now, we graduated from using the caveman mask. We actually had a Hollywood effects team come out and create lifelike masks modeled after real people. So we would wear a mask when we caught them. That was a threatening mask. Then the crows would spend a couple of weeks in captivity in an aviary. And while they were there, they'd be taken care of by a person wearing this mask. It was the same person, but the crows didn't know that. And so they had a couple of weeks to get to figure out that, hey, Linda always feeds me. Every time I see her, she's always giving me food. I like Linda. The one and only time I saw Hero, he captured me. I hate Hero. I'm scared of him. Then we moved him into the imaging lab. We'd let him get used to it. We'd give him the injection of the radio tracer, and then we'd show them either the caring mask or the threatening mask. There's actually another condition that's not mentioned in this graphic where we showed them a brand new face, but the person was holding a dead crow. So they were learning in that moment that that person was dangerous. Then, we scanned their brains, put them back in the aviary and let them go afterwards. And what we saw was that all three different faces, all three different conditions evoked drastically different responses in the crow's brains. They were thinking about them in different ways. The known fear activated the amygdala. That's the part of the brain that's associated with heightened emotion, fear, and accessing emotional memories. So they were remembering, oh, that person's scary. I don't like that person. The caregiver activated areas that are associated with reward. So they see them, they go, oh yeah, you're the food person. I've been conditioned to expect food from you. And then the new person, the person holding the dead crow, they activated different areas, not the amygdala, but the hippocampus and the optic tectum. The hippocampus is associated with the formation of new memories. And the optic tectum means that the bird was fixing their gaze on it and focusing on vision. So they were actively memorizing the face of the person holding the dead crow as their brains were absorbing that FDG18. So this is what it looks like when a crow memorizes a scary person. So not only are they treating these people differently in terms of their behavior, but they're thinking about them in different ways. All right, one last section before I end tonight, and that's the last research project that I did as part of my PhD. So I wanted to merge the PET scan technology that John had done with the facial stuff with the ability to memorize or to learn a new task, especially one involving tools. So I based this research project off of an old Aesop fable, specifically the crow and the pitcher. According to this story, which was thousands of years old, there was a thirsty crow that encountered a vase or a pitcher that had some water in it, but not very much. And in fact, the water was too deep. No matter how much the crow reached and tried to get the water, it couldn't reach it. So rather than die of thirst, what the crow did was it would pick up stones off the ground and drop the stones into the pitcher. And in that way, you drop the stones inside, the stones displace the water, pushing it upwards. The crow was able to reach the water and quench its thirst. Well, for my research, I didn't want to use thirsty crows. I opted to use hungry crows. So here's what the crows saw whenever they were going through that PET scan process. This is a clear plastic tube, and inside was some water, and floating at the surface of the water was a Cheeto. Cheetos work great for this because they float for a really long time. In fact, I don't know what they put in the Cheetos, but they float for basically forever. They also turn the water orange. So if the water level changes, it's easy to see. And also the crows like to eat them. I like to eat them too. So, bonus points there. And I scanned these birds twice. The very first time I scanned them was also the first time they ever saw this thing. They had no idea what it was. So they were what I would consider naive crows. Then they spent a couple of months in captivity learning how to solve this task. And then I scanned them again. And I considered them experienced or knowledgeable because now they know what this is. Now they know how to solve it to varying degrees. And I can look at the change in their brain activity from when they had no idea what it was, they were naive, to knowledgeable, and see just what brain activity is associated with using a tool in a crow. And so what I found out was there are some pretty big changes that happen in their brain. You're not going to have to memorize these terms. They're not going to be on the exam. But very basically, the very first time these birds encounter that task, they have no idea what it is. We see a lot of activity in their mesopallium and their nidopallium and nidopallium caudale. Basically, the parts of the brain that are associated with higher order thought processes. Basically, it's like the neocortex in a human. That's where all of your higher order decision making takes place. Well, I mentioned earlier that we had experienced birds, but not every bird was all that great at solving this task. I had to sort them into different categories based off of how good they were at the task. Low proficiency birds were birds that they'd basically given up. Every time I caught them and put them in the training cage and had them try to interact with it, they would just sit tight and just wait for me to get bored and put them back in their aviary. They would watch it, but they weren't even trying to solve it. Medium proficiency birds were birds that they never really figured out that they needed to drop stones into the tube, but they would still try to reach for it. They'd stick their head into the tube, they'd reach for it. Sometimes they'd accidentally knock one of the floating or one of the balanced training stones I had on the rim, trying to train them to do it. They'd knock those in there and they'd get the food, but they never really seemed to make the connection between stone go in equals good. And in those birds, the poor performers, I saw only activity in their visual processing areas. So they were just sitting there, staring at it, and that was about it. They weren't really wasting thought on it anymore. The medium proficiency birds, I still saw activity in their mesopallium. So they were still thinking about it. They had no idea how to solve it, but they at least were familiar with it, and they knew, oh, there's a Cheeto in there. I really want that Cheeto. How do I get that Cheeto? But then some birds actually got it. Here's a video. So this bird's name is Orange. I give them their names based off of the color of their leg band. And she is a master at this task. You saw that one stone wasn't enough. She had to get a second stone, drops it in there, and then she's able to retrieve the Cheeto. Only 4 birds out of the 18, 20 birds I had in my sample fully mastered it. And oddly enough, they were all adult. They were all adults, and almost all of them were adult females. In fact, all the adult females I had in my cohort figured this out. So odd little trend in that with crows and also with other animals that use tools is a strong female bias. It's always the females that tend to be really good at mastering this sort of stuff. Anyways, in these birds that figured it out, we saw a completely different shift in brain activity. They had activity in the cerebellum, nucleus basorostralis, and hippocampus and tegmentum. Basically, these are all areas that are associated with motor control, memory, and tactile stuff, especially in the beak. What this suggests is that these birds are no longer using their higher order thought processes because they don't need to think about this anymore. They've already mastered this task. They know how to solve it. And in fact, this shift from higher order thought process as amateurs to muscle memory as experts, we see the exact same shift in humans. Anytime you are starting something for the first time, you have to think about it. You have to worry about your technique. You have to, constantly check stuff. But once you've mastered it, it's all muscle memory. You know how to do it. There's something like 330 million years separating mammals from birds. Our brains are structured very differently. And yet, functionally speaking, they seem to behave the same way when it comes to solving smart tasks. And the thing that one of the things I liked about my research relative to a lot of other research that looks at brain activity is that, whenever the study is over, I get to let the birds go.
All right. That's it.
All right. And that's it. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Wow. Uproarious applause. That's
Thank you. It was very nice.
the big drawback that we all have to try to adjust to, that we don't have the ability to smile and chuckle and applaud. But number one, we all love Cheetos, and we're all going to send you a case of them. That was wonderful. If I
you.
may, I'm going to try to curate some of the questions that came in. And if you don't mind, I'm going to put a slide up so no one has to look at me or see. And I think that's the title slide, isn't it? Yeah.
I believe so.
Yes, one of our viewers was asking who was studying the Bothell roost, and I believe that's Douglas Wacker, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And is he also studying vocalizations per se at Bothell, or you maybe?
He's done a lot on his plate right now, but I think that one of his ongoing studies is to try to separate and track individuals at the roost while they're vocalizing. I think he was playing around with like different microphone configurations and AI software to track specific individuals. I'm not sure how far he's gone in that, but yeah, vocalizations are one of the things that he's looking at the roost.
Wonderful. There's some really good questions. I hope I do them justice here. Did recognizing you, this was quite early on, did recognizing you feeding a crow change the vocalization of that crow? This is out in the wild, especially before you fed it as opposed to after you started feeding it.
That was regarding the group. Sorry, that was from me. So that was regarding when you were feeding groups of crows and recording the vocalizations before.
Yeah, I published that study in 2015, and
Thank
so
you.
my memory of the details are a little fuzzy, but if I remember correctly, yeah, it did matter that a person fed them versus just finding a pile of food without a person around. So that was one of the things that I changed was I would either hide a small pile or a big pile, or I would throw a small pile or a big pile to see how food amount, how a human feeder mattered. And it did. It was really hard to sort of parse what those results meant. So I tended to focus only on the main finding, which was that they shift from the longer territorial calls to shorter calls around food, but we're still not sure why they changed to food. And the slide that's currently up, I would wear disguises whenever I'd feed them to try to minimize them recognize me whenever I came back. It didn't matter. They couldn't see my face, but they can always use other cues for your identity. Like I had to carry around a large parabolic microphone in order to record their vocalizations. They keyed in on that pretty easily.
I like to beware of law enforcement. I don't want to take too much of time, but many years ago, I assisted in some research on herring gulls, and we had, unfortunately, it's not been updated, and it's only I forgot the word, conversational. But we had some evidence that they could not only recognize us as individuals going into their colonies, banding their chicks, but also the automobile.
Yeah, I've spoke with a guy who runs a eagle sanctuary out near Stillwater, Oklahoma, and he tells me that the eagles all start calling as soon as they hear his truck driving up the road. And it's his truck specifically. Other people's cars don't cause the same reaction.
Which leads us
Thank
to
you.
another question, which is timely. Is there any way to identify whether calls are from males or female crows?
Not from a human. Well, let me rephrase that. There was a study published in 2016 from some people in the HA lab here at UW. I think Renee Ha has since retired. But anyways, they recorded a bunch of vocalizations from crows. And because these are captive crows, they were able to obtain like individual identity and things like, sex, age, social status. And they plugged all that information along with the vocalizations into a computer program and asked it to look for patterns, predictors, and trends. And the program was able to accurately identify these calls came from a female, these calls came from individual 2A or whatever. So if a computer program is able to accurately sort, new calls based off of whether or not they're male or female, utilizing the existing information, then that implies that the crows can too. So, humans don't have the ear for it, or at least at the very least, I don't have the ear for it, but it can be done by the crows and also evidently by computer programs.
Wonderful. Going a different direction, I think a number of people have noticed that, well, decoy birds like a great horned owl often scare away gulls, but crows don't seem to care. In fact, they might be attracted to it. What's your thought on that?
My guess is, well, first of all, decoy stuff will eventually stop working for any animal. They all habituate to it, but it takes different amounts of time depending on the animal. Gulls will sometimes mob predators, but they tend to only do it whenever their offspring are threatened. So if a predator shows up at like a colonial nesting site, then they'll start mobbing. But if they're just out and about and they see an owl or something, they tend to avoid it. So it takes them a long time to realize that thing's fake. Whereas crows, their strategy is to gather and start dive bombing this thing to chase it away. They're getting close to it. And so when they get close to it, they realize, hey, wait a minute, it's got that plastic shininess. It's not reacting to me at all. If I land like 10 feet away, it doesn't react. If I scooch up close to it, it doesn't react. If I sneak up behind and yank its tail feather, nothing happens. And the tail feather's plastic. So they figure out pretty quick that it's harmless, partly because their whole strategy is to annoy and harass predators.
Which smoothly brings us across into another interesting thing. Several of us, have noticed that, well, for example, the eagle being mobbed, the crows didn't actually touch the eagle. When they're flying, whether it's a crow, red-tailed hawk, or some other raptor, they'll often seem to hit the bird. Do you think there's a different strategy that the crow's employing there? Maybe that eagle.
It's a cost-benefit analysis. If they get close enough to peck the eagle or the hawk, they are also close enough to be grabbed by the eagle or the hawk. So,
such as on the tree.
Yeah, they're going to be kind of wary about getting that close to it, but they will dive bomb. And there's some evidence that there's like a social element to it, like maybe they're showing off and raising status by dive bombing closer, showing bravery. I'm not really sure if there's anything conclusive about that. It's just kind of circumstantial stuff. Right, but if they dive bomb and they're not close, eventually the predator will start to ignore them, which means it could, if it wanted to, start thinking about going hunting again. So if the predator starts to ignore them, that's when they might feel brave enough to actually, peck as they fly overhead. And if they peck them every now and then the predator will start paying attention to them again, then they back off and start sort of dive bombing them. So it's like a give and take flexible strategy.
You've
And
attracted
crows will
a
make
number-
mistakes. They will get grabbed by the thing they're trying to mob.
You've attracted a number of good armchair scientists in your audience today. One of them's asking it's been so wonderful to try to follow the logic of these experiments and so on. It's just been great, Loma. Well,
Thank you.
when you were doing the PET scan evaluation with the person holding a dead crow, if you had that same person come by without the crow, did you have the same kind of PET scan results? Or
We didn't run that experiment, but my guess is it's no different than the person who caught them. They had a traumatic event in the past. They are re-accessing those memories. Like, hey, I remember you did this thing to me. And that was a traumatic memory. I'm scared of you. Whereas in that moment, when the person was holding the dead crow, they were forming new memories. But just like with the other person, they formed those memories at one point, and then if you see them again, they will treat them no different than the known threat. That's my interpretation anyway. We didn't actually run that experiment.
you still have a bit more energy for us? You sound great.
Yeah,
Loma,
I could keep talking. I actually saw
Thank
one.
you.
I saw one question that I wanted to specifically address.
Feel free to pick it out.
Where'd it go? I lost
pick up some others.
it. Where is it?
Well, I'll say one now that you can do it, I'm sure, in your sleep. We noticed that when you released your crows, they still had their jewelry on their ankles. And we wondered, number one, how long do you tend to keep a specific crow in study? And when you let them go, do they tend to be able to go back to their family groups, or is there any way to
Yeah,
tell?
that was actually the question that I was looking for. And that was something that I sort of worried about because, I captured these crows after the breeding season was over. So, late September, early October. And then I made sure to always release them before the next breeding season began. So in theory, they would be able to reinsert themselves back into their old lives and get back to their old mates, but I could never really know for certain. However, I'm going to reshare screen real quick.
Sure.
However, a couple of weeks after I let those birds go, I had that video, somebody from the Woodland Park Zoo emailed me, and they had a story. They said that, yeah, for the last year or so, I've been feeding the crows over in the Western parking lot every time I show up for work. And, they would always fly up and follow me. It became part of my day. Well, a couple of months ago, one of them vanished, and, I got sad. I thought that it was taken by a predator. But then all of a sudden, she showed up again like a week ago, and she's wearing a bunch of little leg bands. And I got really excited. I'm like, oh, what leg bands did she have on? And so she sent me some photos. This is Orange. That's the bird that was solving the Aesop task in the video. And she apparently lives at the Woodland Park Zoo. And when I heard about that, of course, I had to put some of these Aesop tubes out to see what she did with them. And I'll tell you right now, she does not solve any of them. Here she comes. This is her mate. But unlike all the other crows there, she's also completely unafraid of them. She marched right up. She ate the Cheetos that I scattered along the ground to try and lure them close. None of the other crows were willing to get that close. But she knows what these things are, and she is unafraid of them.
Wonderful.
That was really encouraging me because it told me that, yeah, they are actually able to reintegrate into their old lives.
You gave me the opportunity. You just let me right in there to bring this one. Oh dear, where'd it go? I'm sorry. It seems as if most of our remaining questions have to do with food and Cheetos. things like that, which is perfectly fine. I don't seem to be able to get this to go full, but you allowed me to bring up Canuck very briefly. This was a crow who fell out of a nest, I believe, about almost 10 years ago. And the chap up in Canada called it Canuck, of course, and put a little red zip tie on its left leg. And so just like any banded or otherwise marked animal, you tell this individual, it's so wonderful. So there was the opportunity for this crow to learn things and get involved in various mischief.
Yeah, I heard a joke looking at that photo saying, you know, you've wandered into the wrong neighborhood when a bird mugs you while wearing an ankle monitor.
Right, right. Oh, Johnny, look, it's doing that again. Let's do that. Excuse me. That we also had on that photo on that slide a picture of little Gabby, who probably a number of you remember because it was during, maybe 10 years ago that Gabby was noted to have made friends with a crow in some way, a bunch of crows who would bring her gifts, right?
She attracted a lot of attention, a little bit of notoriety too. Apparently her family went a little overboard with the feeding of the crows. Like they'd put out, pounds and pounds of dog food every day, attracting hundreds of crows, which if they're just going to hang out, wait to be fed all day, they're going to get into mischief. And so they ended up causing a lot of damage for the neighbors. And so
there was a lawsuit and so on.
Yeah, there was a lawsuit.
I was curious to see where Gabby had done it. I can't tell you except that she moved from Seattle and went to Albany, New York some years ago.
Yeah, funny little story. We actually did a news segment with Gabby present. So our lab and Gabby, like one of the local TV stations, came out and did that. And so as part of that demonstration, we decided, we'll show them a crow funeral. So Kaylee got one of her crows out, put it out on the front lawn, and this happened during the spring. Previously when she did all of her testing, it was during the autumn, but during the spring, something very strange happened. A crow flew down. Camera guy was getting the shot, and the crow walked over to the dead crow and started mating with it and started copulating with it. And we were all like, what's going on? And of course, Dad was like, what's it doing? And we're like, luckily Gabby's mom came up with a really good excuse, like, it's trying to save it, CPR. But that actually led to a really interesting discovery because of that demonstration that during the mating season, because of they're amped up on all those hormones, the crows will sometimes copulate with the dead crow. It's a improper behavior because you have a behavior that meant for mating, but they're directing it towards the wrong party. And so we got a couple of good publications out of that.
Wow. Well, I hate to end on death, but have you also witnessed or been told about crows killing crows? I mean, seeming to.
Yeah, that happens. That happens. I mean, it's no different than people getting into a bar fight and accidentally killing someone. It's almost always a territorial dispute or mating dispute. And they start fighting, one of them gets hurt, and the other one's so amped up that it just keeps attacking until the other one's dead. Usually what happens is whenever one of them decides that it's done or it's beaten, it flies away. So it leaves before it can get hurt anymore. But if it gets injured and the other one never really receives that, it's flying away, I should stop chasing it signal, it'll just keep beating on it until it's killed it. So we see a similar thing in humans and in other animals.
Yeah, very reflective. If anyone else has a question or comment, we welcome you to unmute and give it.
I've got like another 5 minutes or so. Yeah.
I, for one, will think of you every time I open my favorite crunchy, salty, orange-colored snack from now on.
Yeah, they like Cheetos. They love chicken nuggets. I offered them a whole wide array of food in the aviary. Like I had a rotating selection of food. Their favorite food was always either the chicken nuggets or the hard-boiled egg yolks. But they love that stuff.
Well, Loma, we can't thank you enough. This is really, you really set a standard for all future presentations. Wonderful anecdotes, superb science. Really appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.